I dress this way? A crazy drag queen, well perhaps you're gay. Is there a point to all these fancy clothes? With all these buckles from your head down to your toes? Very simple, but I'm just another girl. It's not so easy, but I'm giving it a whirl. Is there something that you're trying to prove? With all the makeup and the way you move, are you looking for some sympathy? No, I'm trying to be the best girl I can be. Very simple, but I'm just another girl. It's not so easy, but I'm giving it a whirl. Like my martini's dry, cosmos I won't deny. Smoke those long cigarettes. Thank God I'm not dead yet. Done all these crazy things, short of a wedding ring. Just love, love,
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Callista Solon, and you're watching nlcTrans.
You got caught drinking your coffee.
I did. Anyway, tonight I'm here with my dear friends and co-hosts, T.A.L.L. Alexander and Renee Benoit. Renee hasn't been with us for a while. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you.
We may actually have a little bit of B-roll for you later, and we've got some stories to talk about. But before we get to that, I just wanted to quickly go to you, Renee, and you're going to bring us a very interesting guest next week.
Yes, I believe it's next Wednesday. It's a parent of a suicide.
Yeah. And you had participated recently in a suicide prevention event up in your neck of the woods.
Putnam. Yes. Yes.
And this all ties into that.
That's how I got to meet her through this accelerator, persuader.
Yeah.
It was a great function. It was a concert. It was a fundraiser for that. It was kind of sad, but and all in all,
sure.
But she's supposedly supposed to be here next week, hopefully.
Well, that's good. That will be an interesting show. Certainly, it's a topic that's near and dear to our hearts.
Yes.
Certainly, it seems like there's a very high rate of suicide among all marginalized populations, but I know that certainly among our population, it tends to be extremely high. So that should be a good thing.
Really good.
Anyway, so that will be next week. In the meantime, I know you had some stories. Did you want to start? Something you wanted to start with, or?
No, it's all right. You go ahead. That's
I was just.
That's a prettier picture.
I have a pretty picture of a rainbow bus here on my thing, and this is
a rainbow double-decker bus.
A rainbow double-decker bus. This is obviously British. This one is a very quick story, but I just thought this was kind of cute. The Queen gives her blessing. Same-sex marriages to begin in the UK. With this final formal step in a long debate, Queen Elizabeth II has given her blessing to same-sex marriages, which will begin next year in the United Kingdom. The Associated Press reports that the House of Commons Speaker, John Bercow, said that the Queen's approval came on Wednesday, just one day after Parliament had finished its work. The change in law takes effect in time for summer weddings in 2014. On May 21st, the bill passed its third reading in the House of Commons by a vote of 366 to 161. It passed its third reading in the House of Lords on July 15th. I love that they have a House of Lords. That is so cool.
And the House of Commons.
The House of Commons, but yeah. Prime Minister David Cameron is credited with pushing for marriage equality while speaking to his own Conservative Party in a speech in 2011. Cameron explained, yes, it's about equality, but it's also about something else, commitment. Conservatives believe in the ties that bind us, that society is stronger when we make vows to each other and we support each other. So I don't support gay marriage in spite of being a conservative. I support gay marriage because I am a conservative. I thought that was really cool. LGBT activists in the country rejoiced at the news while also noting work left to be done. It's impossible to express how much joy this historic step will bring to tens of thousands of gay people and their families and friends, said the head of Stonewall in the UK, Ben Summerskill. The bill's progress through Parliament shows that at last the majority of politicians in both houses understand the public support for equality, though it's also reminded us that gay people still have powerful opponents. The group had famously purchased ads on Britain's iconic double-decker buses that expanded on its slogans such as, "Some guys marry guys, get over it." "Some people are gay, get on with it." Opponents of marriage equality pushed for ads mocking the slogans by claiming gay people can be turned straight. Not gay, post-gay, ex-gay and proud, get over it. The British are so funny. I love British humor. Marriage equality faced vocal opposition, especially from religious leaders, but also in Parliament, where amendments intended to scuttle the bill were denied. Now Stonewall intends to redouble its efforts to bring marriage equality to Scotland. Anyway, yeah, double-decker buses painted in rainbow colors. It's cool. You probably can't see that, but it's cool anyway. So, anyway, that was that. I thought that was just dandy.
Just dandy.
It was cool. I know you had.
Well, there's a few things, but the one that caught my attention the most is probably the. Well, it's not very new considering, but I only heard about it today. On July 22nd, so Monday, the day before the 6th anniversary of the crime that shocked Connecticut and the nation, HBO will be releasing a documentary on the Pettit murders.
Wow.
A 2-hour film by David Heilbronner and Kate Davis called The Cheshire Murders will premiere at 9 p.m. July 22nd. The work includes interviews conducted by the filmmakers in which the Cheshire Police Department is criticized for its handling of the case and its refusal to provide information. HBO publicists provided an advance copy to the Register. This is from the New Haven Register. Dr. Pettit, whom we know,
very nice man,
the lone survivor of the home invasion, appears in the film. Reflects on how his family suffered that day. He did not discuss the police department's handling of the crime. Hawk Pettit's sister, Cynthia Hawk Wren of North Carolina, told Davis and Heilbronner they were off-the-record reports that the police department, police officers outside the Pettit house heard screaming. And they talk in this article a lot about the what's actually in the film and the various different pieces of evidence that they're presenting. But what caught my attention when there was a radio interview, actually, right now, in all things considered, with the film directors, they were talking about how they tried to be as nonpartisan and comprehensive as they felt they could,
right,
in presenting what people said they saw versus what some of the reports were. The things that went right, the things that seemed to have gone wrong, and indeed talking about the two defendants and what the only way their point of view was the only way we're going to learn from the mistakes that were made is to understand what motivated them to do this in the first place. So they dive into the history of both of Komisarjevsky and I'm missing the other name.
What was his name? God.
Anyway, into the two defendants' background, and so it looks like it's going to be very interesting. HBO has a track record of doing very thorough, thoughtful documentaries, and I don't know when it'll be available to folks if they don't get HBO. But the HBO stuff is usually ultimately available on Netflix or Hulu or somewhere else as well. HBO Go, if you have one of those. Of course, in order to have that, you have to have HBO, so never mind. Or through an HBO store, pick up the video or something. But being that we are here in Connecticut and we were patients of Dr. Pettit's, this one was something that caught my attention.
Yeah, that was one that hit very close to home. A very nice man with a beautiful family, and what a tragedy that was.
And some of the video as well. There's a note here that not that the video prints out, but the page in the New Haven Register included the video of Jennifer Hawk Pettit at the bank, where she withdrew money and reported what was happening to her family. That's also used in the documentary.
Yeah, that was heartbreaking.
Conflicting reports about whether police officers observed the home for about 25 minutes before the fire started, or if when police officers arrived, the house was already in flames, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that should be interesting anyway. Anyway.
And then we have some of the stuff we were talking about earlier is what I like to call fun, but fun,
okay.
Yeah, but in reality it's not fun because there are people out there that actually think this way.
Oh yeah, that.
And it's really disturbing. And so this first one is something that we've noticed. I've noticed time and again is that, and over the years maybe the publicity hasn't been the best, but the notion that homosexuals are sexually driven people, that the homosexual quote-unquote lifestyle is one of promiscuous open sex at bars and just, and it's like, okay, just like in the regular population, there are heterosexuals that are promiscuous at various ages. There are homosexuals that are promiscuous at various ages too.
Sure.
To assume anything else is to blind yourself to reality. But it's certainly not the case that you can make the blanket statement that all heterosexuals are sex-driven because some heterosexuals are sex-driven.
Right.
So it's also not fair to make the assumption that all homosexuals are sex-driven just because some of them are. But Matt Barber and Steve Crampton, boy, that just sounds like he's uncomfortable. There's a video. This is we've talked about it before. Brought to light by Right Wing Watch, claims that, quote, the average homosexual is not controlled by reason. It's really a life controlled by lust. The passion has overwhelmed him, and his partner. Interesting that the two guys are partners in the never mind. Barber echoed those sentiments, saying that sex-centric gays define their entire identity based on aberrant sexual temptations and acting on those temptations. Right. Earlier in the year, Barber slammed the adoption by same-sex couples, saying it was basically purchasing children.
Wow.
Now, I don't know, I don't understand how heterosexual couple adopting children is any different than a homosexual couple adopting children in the exchange of money for services rendered.
Yeah, but see, the difference is that the homosexual couple, they're going to eat them.
Oh, that's right.
I'm kidding. It's just nuts. Anyway, go on. It's craziness.
Well, he called the adoption of children by same-sex couples selfish and hurtful to the children. And I think any child that's had to grow up without parents would probably disagree that two loving parents is a lot better than none.
Yeah, didn't any of you people watch My Two Dads? It wasn't about it. Anyway, but it was a cute show.
I've got the theme to My Three Sons in my head now. Thanks.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I will stop. Go on.
He also, Barber also tweeted a drawing that implies that pedophiles will be scout leaders now that the Boy Scouts have lifted sexuality as youth membership criteria.
Wow.
So this is part of the two things that come to mind, rushing to mind when I saw these. One, and I'll get to the other one in a moment. One is this underlying notion that homosexuality is about sex.
Yes.
And it's not any more about sex than heterosexuality is about sex. It's just that for an heterosexual, everyone assumes you're a heterosexual. for a homosexual or a bisexual or an asexual or a pansexual person, they assume you're heterosexual. So you have to correct them. I can't talk about my boyfriend at work because I'm dating you. It's, so it's not a matter of shoving something in people's faces. It's just, I can't talk about my girlfriend if that's, if you see me talking about what my girlfriend and my fiance and I did this weekend as shoving my sexuality in your face, I guess I can't help that, but...
Right, yeah, it's...
We struck a nerve.
Yeah, it's, I say it's funny, but it's not really funny. It's just so absurd that it really is funny.
So unfortunately the notion of homosexuals as sex-crazed people leads to these unfair categorizations that they're also perverts, they're also going to molest children, and I would sort of defy any of the priests charged with molesting young boys to categorize themselves as gay.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. I actually have a piece that sort of follows that for possibly later if there's time, but about bisexuals and why so many of them stay in the closet. And I
have one on asexuality too.
It's very, very, very interesting. We actually have a phone call, and so we should probably take this
before they get impatient.
Good evening, nlcTrans. You're on the air.
Yes, good evening. This is Jan Henry C. Kaufman. I've spoken to you once before.
Oh, hi.
I don't listen to the show on a regular basis, but whenever I do, I come away having learned something and gaining more and more respect for you and your courage.
Oh, thank you.
And your stamina. So I would encourage you, as a favor to me, to speak up, because that's the good news. The bad news is the old girl just turned 64, and I am very, very, very ill.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm hoping to go on a national campaign to publicize why rheumatoid arthritis kills people more than or as much as breast cancer and blood work. Mm-hmm. But I've got to do something here at home first.
Sure.
And I'm hoping that you'll help me with it.
Sure.
Go ahead. I'll stop in a sec.
Okay.
I have to catch my breath because I'm on oxygen. I'm in a nursing home rehab in New London. I've been keeping a low pro so I can get better. We don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm going to give it my all. I have to do something this weekend that's going to be pretty bold, and I think you're going to understand why I'm doing it.
Okay.
But I am deaf in one ear and blind in one eye now, so do speak up, please.
Sure. Okay.
So here's what I want to ask you to do. I believe, now Renee's the person in the middle, right?
Renee's on the outside.
Yes, right there.
Who's Renee?
Right here.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Renee.
And hi, Renee.
Hi.
And then the lady with the beautiful long hair.
Oh.
Yeah.
Me? You.
The one in the center.
She's trying to figure out who the woman in the center is.
I'm Callista.
Callista?
Yeah.
I never knew that. That's a beautiful name.
Well, thank you.
Callista, I think that you're one of the smartest people I've ever met, or haven't met, but
well, thank you.
I do
seem
too.
to perhaps work in like a technical field or something.
Yes.
So in as much as you're very bright and very articulate and very attractive, I was kind of curious if you guys have thought, you folks, have thought at all about putting up candidates for the City Council or the Board of Education.
Wow. That's an interesting idea. We hadn't really thought too much about that, mainly because our organization, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, so we tend to stay out of politics because it sort of is one of those things that could get us into trouble.
Right,
So-
but I
Put it in
wouldn't
a
be
personal
as,
place.
I suggest it not on behalf of your organization, but as private citizens.
Sure. And that we can
The
do.
Democrats or the Republicans or the Greens or a third party.
Yeah.
There will be a third party, you know that, Junction. The city is ready to take the city back,
Right.
and I'm gonna be the canary in the mine this weekend. Because from my perch here up on the hill on Vauxhall Street, I'm going to be running a campaign. Oh dear Lord and Mary Mother.
Wow.
I'm running a no confidence campaign against our dear friend, Mayor Finizio.
Wow.
Well, there you
Love
go.
him personally, love his husband, love everything about him, but he will not listen to me. He doesn't even get his grammar in Latin correct, and he's too smart to make those mistakes.
Well, God bless you, and stay strong, and keep up the good work.
So just so you know, in New London this weekend, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Renee.
I said, keep up the good work, stay strong, and keep on fighting for a positive.
Okay, so if you folks just think about it a little bit,
Okay.
because really, you bring a very, very important perspective, especially to the Board of Education. I'm considering running because I have a long history serving on and for boards in New York State, and it's the last thing in the world I should be doing.
Right.
But if I'm going to do it, holy moly, somebody else ought to do it. Because I just bring my little Irish elderly perspective. You bring a lifetime of courage, just like Martin Luther King.
Oh.
It's a
Wow.
burden, but you chose it.
Yes, that is absolutely true. Absolutely true.
So, and I would invite anybody who's listening tonight to call in, because I'm going to say I'll go on now.
Okay.
Because this weekend I'll actually be known as Jan of Arc.
Wow.
Oh boy. It's a good thing Mother doesn't watch the show. She's not big on diversity, but she's 88. So
Wow.
at any rate, I'm doing it.
All right.
I'm going to let the chips fall where they may.
Good for you.
Yes.
Alrighty, ladies. Good luck.
Thank
luck to
you.
you.
Thank you.
I encourage your constituents to call and encourage you to represent our city, because the person who challenged me to do this is the head of LOT, is one of the LOT spokespeople,
Uh-huh.
and he said, I challenge you because he said he was going to bring the city to its knees. The city isn't at fault. The leadership or lack thereof is. So I got to protect my city.
Right.
That's right.
You got any questions?
God bless.
Yeah, good for
Thank
you.
you.
Good for you.
All the prayers I can get. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for calling.
So cute.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
That is so wonderful.
Jan of
Wow.
Arc.
Wow, that is great. What a great caller.
God love her.
Oh,
We would have to take a look and see what kind of requirements there are for running for the school board and stuff, to see if there's residency requirements and stuff.
right.
But
Yeah, that's
but there are certainly people we know in the community who live in New London or live in the area who maybe are really good candidates for that as well.
yeah. Very interesting. Wow.
And I think you know the short, high energy one I'm thinking of.
Oh yeah, absolutely know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
Who is dying to make a significant impact in our community,
Yeah,
in our community as New London,
absolutely.
not our community as in the rainbow community.
Yeah, that wonderful, that food for thought. Really, really great stuff. And
And we'll have to look at the rheumatoid arthritis thing as well.
yes, and maybe we can do a show on that. And yeah, that.
Well, interestingly, Ben, the B-roll I do have for tonight, if we want to go to it at some point, is on diabetes and glucose and blood sugar and maybe trying to simplify or demystify some of the
Yeah.
stuff that gets talked about. But
Yeah, and maybe we can do something on the arthritis thing at a later date. And I was going to suggest maybe we could get Jan on the show, but that may be difficult. Maybe we could visit Jan and get some film or
Do some
something.
film or something.
So something like that.
Sure.
We could in the future do that. That would be really good. So yeah, great stuff.
We possibly could get someone from T.A.L.L to
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And-
You have connections at T.A.L.L. We could do something there. So yeah, great stuff. Absolutely wonderful call. Wonderful call. I love it. So anyway, you were moving on to something else.
Only if you want me to go on to the stormtroopers.
The stormtroopers. Okay, yes, go on to the stormtroopers.
Okay.
You've piqued my interest now.
Oh, you know what this is. Gentleman by the name of Brian Fisher.
Oh yes.
Yes. He runs a conservative Christian radio show for the American Family Association called Focal Point. Was railing against the Don't Ask, Don't Tell being repealed and allowing homosexuals into the military to serve openly in the military. They've been in the military for ages. American Family Radio, that's his show. Claiming that the homosexual agenda is the main threat to religious liberty. And that's a whole separate thing, that culture war that they've got whipped up. He's famous for saying that the I say that and then I here it is. Reiterated in a previous and unsubstantiated claim that Adolf Hitler's Nazi stormtroopers were made up of homosexuals because only homosexuals were brutal enough to inflict the kind of personal damage on people.
That one blew me away when I heard it.
So what he's concerned about now, what's happening now, he says, is Christians are being moved out of the military so that hyper-masculine homosexuals can move in, similar to the kind of homosexuals that formed Hitler's stormtroopers.
Yeah. How do they think this stuff up?
really.
Oh God. Anyway.
So yeah, more of the nonsense in the echo chamber.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Anyway.
did you have another thing or?
I actually had an interesting thing to follow your piece up, which and this one's short, which I kind of wanted to read, but this was from the LA Times, and this was I'm not sure how much time, we probably don't have much time. I'm gonna sort of paraphrase this very quickly, but this is why bisexuals stay in the closet, and this whole thing is something we've talked about before. Our friend Ron Suresh used to talk about bisexual erasure.
Yep.
Only 28% of bisexuals have come out because of stereotypes in the straight and gay communities that they're sex-crazed or incapable of monogamy. There was a study apparently, and that's basically what it says, is that they're all staying in the closet because everybody, and I've personally experienced this. I can tell you I've personally experienced this.
You were dating a guy
Yeah.
who wanted to know if you were going to want to date a woman while you were dating him because you were bisexual.
Yeah, because as a bisexual, it means that you have to have threesomes all the time. You can't actually, this whole concept that, and so people that are bisexual, and I am bisexual, people that are bisexual are afraid to say it because everybody thinks, and this is apparently there's now a study that shows that this is true, that everybody seems to think that means you're some sex-crazed thing that has to have sex with both sexes at the same time. It's like, that's not what it means, folks.
And certainly, I mean, there's part of that erasure are the assumptions that get made when you see a couple walking down the street. As a bisexual, I'm either going to be dating a man or a woman or someone who doesn't identify or someone who identifies. I'm going to be with one person.
Right.
And you're going to see me with that person, and you're going to make a judgment about whether it's a homosexual or heterosexual relationship. And then you're going to draw a conclusion about my sexuality based on that relationship.
Right.
Well, as a bisexual, if I'm dating a man or I'm dating a woman, that doesn't stop me from being a bisexual. It just means that at that moment I'm in a homosexual or heterosexual relationship.
Exactly.
So there's a little bit of that sort of natural neural assumption that goes on when I see two people together and I assume something about their sexuality, that I don't normally assume someone's bisexual and happens to be in a relationship with XYZ right now. So I think that's part of the problem. But what we've talked about too, or what doesn't get talked about enough, is the fact that you hear oftentimes from the heteronormative community that bisexuals are just people who can't make up their mind, that they're sitting on the fence and they, or even worse, they want the best of both worlds. Like, you shouldn't be able to have it.
Right, exactly.
Like, you should have to pick one and limit yourself.
Yeah.
And what we don't talk about a lot is that there's that same sense of indignation and fence sitting from the homosexual community, from many gays and lesbians, that bisexuals are just sitting on the fence, that they don't want to commit to being gay, that they want to have one foot in the straight world so that if things go sour, you can fall on that side of the riot line. And it's just, they get slammed from both sides.
Yeah.
And as a result,
unfairly,
they typically just keep it to themselves.
Yeah.
And I know at some of the panels we've done, people they sort of ask the question, well, why are you a bisexual? And my answer has always been like, why would I limit my options?
Yeah.
But
I know it's pretty crazy, but yeah, it's something we've talked about before. And are we going to run out of time here?
Well, it's got a 16-minute video and a little bit of outro, so we should go if we're going to go.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so this is sort of self-explanatory. This is a video from the Khan Academy. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get back from it.
Which is very cool, the Khan Academy.
It's very cool, and we've talked about it once or twice before. I have hopefully a little demo to show you. And this one is hopefully demystifying type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool.
Do its different functions. If we're talking about a brain cell, it needs energy to keep stimulating other brain cells and sending on signals and messages. If it's a muscle cell, it needs energy to contract. They need energy just to do the basic functions of a cell. And the place that they get that energy from, or the primary source of that energy, is from glucose. Glucose, and glucose is a simple sugar. If you were to actually taste glucose, it would taste sweet. And glucose gets delivered to cells through the bloodstream. So this right here, I'm drawing some blood that's passing by a cell. Maybe the blood is going in that direction over there. And inside the blood, let me draw some small glucose molecules passing by. And so in an ideal situation, when a cell needs energy, glucose will enter the cell. So glucose will enter the cell. Unfortunately, it's not that simple for the great majority of cells in the human body. The glucose won't enter by itself. It needs the assistance of a hormone or a molecule called insulin. So let me label all of these. This right here is glucose, and it needs insulin. So let me draw insulin as these magenta molecules right over here. So that over there, that is insulin. Insulin. And the surface of these cells, they have insulin receptors on them. And I'm just drawing very simplified versions of them. Kind of a place where these magenta circles can attach, can bind. And what happens is in order for the glucose to be taken up by the cell, insulin has to kind of attach to these receptors, which unlocks the channels for glucose. In order for the glucose to go in, insulin has to bind to the insulin receptors. And then once that happens, then the glucose can be taken up can be taken up by the cell. Now, unfortunately, things don't always work as planned. So let me draw a couple of scenarios here. So once again, let me draw my very simple version of a cell. And let me draw the bloodstream going by right over here. And then let me draw the glucose in the bloodstream. So I have my glucose floating by. And then I have my insulin receptors. My insulin receptors on the surface of a cell. Now, the first thing that could go wrong here is, what if the body does not produce insulin? Insulin is produced in the pancreas. What happens if the pancreas is not producing insulin properly? So no insulin. Well, in this situation, since there's nothing to bind to these receptors, the glucose channels won't be opened up, and the glucose will not be able to enter into the cell. And this situation is type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, where you've got glucose, so in theory you have energy, and you have properly functioning insulin receptors, but you just don't have insulin to kind of unlock the gates for the glucose to actually go into the cell. The other scenario that you could imagine happening, let me draw the cell again. So there's my cell, and let me draw the blood flowing past the cell. And once again, obviously, this is just one of trillions of cells in the human body. We have an estimated 10 to 100 trillion cells. So this is a very simple diagram, but hopefully it gets the point across. So once again, let me draw some glucose floating by. Let me draw some insulin receptors on the cell. So insulin receptor there, maybe an insulin receptor right over there. And let's say we even have some insulin. So our pancreas is producing insulin and putting it into our bloodstream, so it's there to be used. But a situation can arise where the receptors are not working properly, or we've become insensitive or desensitized to insulin. So desensitized receptors. So in this situation, you have sometimes maybe it might be the insulin is hard to bind, or even if it does bind, it's not working properly, so the glucose will not enter the cell. And so in either one of the, I already wrote desensitized. So in either one of these scenarios, let's just think in a very broad level. I'm not going to go into the details of the actual therapy for these diseases, of how it can be cured. Oh, and I didn't even name the second one. The second one right here, as you can imagine, if this up here is type 1 diabetes, this down here is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes. Now, the simple way that, or I don't want to say it's necessarily simple, but the way that you can manage type 1 diabetes is you can inject insulin. The only problem here is, it's a big one though, is that there's no insulin in the bloodstream. Everything else is working properly. So over here, we can inject insulin. We can inject it. And then you'll have insulin to attach to the receptors, and then the glucose can be processed properly. Type 2 diabetes, there's kind of multiple lines of attack. One thing that you can do, there are actually drugs that attempt to kind of resensitize your insulin receptors. You can also do that with a combination of lifestyle changes that makes your body, I guess, more sensitized to sugar. Or you can even, and if things get severe enough, you can add insulin, just like you would do in type 1 diabetes. And you can say, wait, I already have insulin here. Why would I add more insulin? Well, remember, we're not kind of, the cells can process insulin, but they're desensitized. They would need more insulin in order to kind of uptake the same amount of glucose. So if you add insulin, you could possibly have enough of a trigger that the glucose can actually be taken up. But there's multiple lines of attack here, and usually the first one are giving drugs that help hopefully make resensitize you or make you less desensitized to the actual insulin. And so the last thing I just want to think about a little bit is, well, what happens if you didn't do this? Well, there's two major problems here. Obviously, your cells can't function if it's not taking up glucose, so your cells will have no energy. And another problem, if you weren't to manage either one of these types of diabetes is that sugar, once it gets to enough, if it gets to high enough concentrations in the blood, it can actually cause a lot of damage. So sugar can cause damage to the body. So you don't want either of these things happening. You want your cells to have energy, and you don't want to have too much sugar flowing in your blood and causing damage to your body. Let's think a little bit about how we can tell whether our body is processing glucose properly and whether maybe we have diabetes. And I want y'all to take all of this with a huge grain of salt, because I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. My goal here is to kind of just explore the subject with you and to try for all of us to get a better understanding of things. So let's think about what might happen after we have a meal. So let me draw a little chart over here. So let's call this hours. And then on the vertical axis, I'm going to talk about our concentration of sugar in the blood. So blood sugar concentration. Blood sugar, or you could call it glucose concentration. Blood sugar concentration. When we're talking about blood sugar, we're talking about glucose concentration. And let me draw a couple of points on this chart. So maybe this is 50, and our units are going to be milligrams per deciliter. And actually, let me just do it this way. Let me just say that everything is in milligrams per deciliter. And we'll talk in future videos about, well, what kind of, how we can relate these units to everyday terms. But let's say that this right here is 50. This right here is 100. This right here is 150, and let's mark it right here at 200. So let's think about what would happen for a normal person. Let me mark some hours over here. So hour 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's probably good enough. So a normal person, when they haven't eaten anything for a long time, let's say greater than 8 hours, so their fasting blood sugar will be right around 80 milligrams per deciliter, give or take a little bit. There's a range around that, but I just want to show you what would happen to a normal person. So an 80 milligrams per deciliter, their blood sugar will kind of be, should hopefully be right around there. And sometimes this fasting blood sugar, and maybe we're assuming that this is in the morning, so maybe this hour 1 is 7 in the morning, so they haven't eaten for a while, and that's why it's fasting blood sugar. This is also, you'll hear, and kind of, you'll sometimes hear doctors, I've heard my wife say this word without knowing what it meant, they'll sometimes say preprandial. Preprandial, which is a very fancy word, which just means before a meal. Prandial is literally before eating. After the meal, you're talking postprandial. So it's a very fancy word for a very simple idea, eating. So let's say at hour 2, this individual eats breakfast. So this is where the individual is going to eat breakfast. Now, in a normal person, when that person eats breakfast, there will be some carbohydrates in that breakfast, and it will be broken down into glucose, and that glucose will enter the bloodstream. And so their blood glucose will go up. Their blood glucose will go up. It'll slowly go up, and I was reading some studies. They say it kind of spikes at about 45 minutes into a meal. So let's see, 45 minutes is over there. So maybe it'll go up to about there. And in a normal individual, the blood glucose really shouldn't go up above 120 milligrams per deciliter. And all of, there's obviously exceptions to all of these. We're just kind of saying like a normal breakfast, a normal person. They're not, they're not eating a pint of honey. They're not doing something crazy. So let's say 120 would be right around there. A normal person, someone who does not have diabetes, it would be unlikely that it would go above that. And then actually after about 2 hours, they're getting pretty close to normal. They get back under 100 milligrams per deciliter. And then you go beyond 2 hours, they just kind of get close back to their baseline, to that 80 milligrams per deciliter. So once again, this is normal. And of course, don't freak out if you were to take a blood test one morning and you're at like 85 milligrams per deciliter. You're still not far off from normal. So obviously there's some variation from person to person. Now, if someone has diabetes. If either they have type 1, they don't have enough insulin to actually process the glucose, or if they have enough insulin but their body is desensitized to it, the insulin isn't being processed properly, so they can't process the glucose, we've seen that the glucose concentrations will go up. And so in general, if you were to wake up one morning after not having eaten for more than 8 hours, and you were to prick your finger with one of those little glucose monitors you can get at the drugstore, and in your finger, the blood sugar levels, if you were to find them to be, let's say you were to find them to be at 100, let's say 140, that's 140 milligrams per deciliter. It's a good indication. I mean, you shouldn't freak out. You should do multiple tests and make sure that it wasn't a false reading or any of that. And you should definitely see a doctor. Once again, don't view this as any type of medical advice. That is not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is just to understand a little bit of what's going on. Don't change your lifestyle based on anything I tell you. All right. So if you do experience that, it looks like, at least just from that one data point, that your body isn't processing sugar properly, because you've had over 8 hours to process the sugar for insulin to go in your bloodstream and allow glucose to be taken up and get back down to a normal level, but it still hasn't gone there. So if you were to test a value like that, you should be concerned. In general, the threshold, and I've seen multiple thresholds here, are between 100 and I've seen high, kind of mid 120s to 130 milligrams per deciliter. So that's kind of, let me do it in this range. It's kind of, if your fasting blood sugar is above this line right here. Remember, the fasting blood sugar, not after you've eaten a meal. Your preprandial, before a meal. If it is above that threshold right over there, then you should definitely see a doctor and make sure that they can see if you have diabetes. But this would be cause for concern. The other thing is, if after a meal it spikes well beyond that, if it gets above 180, and once again, these are all just thresholds that doctors have come up with and researchers have come up with that say, hey, this is a good indication that somehow you are not processing glucose properly. So 180 is up here. And I'm drawing it as a squiggly line because it's kind of a range. It's not like, if your blood glucose is 124, you're safe, and all of a sudden at 125 you have diabetes. No, they're not that different than each other, but they have to set up some threshold so that, just to kind of have a threshold, I guess. So if your blood sugar after eating a meal were to spike up to, let's say, 200, once again, that would be cause for concern. So in general, if someone has diabetes, because they're not processing the glucose properly, their blood glucose might look something like this. So maybe their fasting blood glucose is right around 125, 130. It can move around. Then they have a meal. Then it might spike up. They might have, obviously they can process some of the glucose, otherwise they would die. But it's not being processed properly, so the glucose levels don't go down to where they should, and maybe you get some glucose gets taken up from the blood. Obviously they're living, so their cells are metabolizing something, but it never gets down to the normal 80 milligrams per deciliter. It might settle down back to something in the 120 range or something like that, which would be cause for concern. And in general, if you're someplace, I've seen the threshold, if you're above 100 on a fasting basis, that's cause for concern. You should maybe adjust your lifestyle. And if you're above 120, 130 after a meal, once again, you should also be slightly worried that you maybe are pre-diabetic or you have some risk of developing diabetes. So this is a high. If someone has blood sugar like this, they're probably diabetic. And if someone has blood sugar like this, they should be worried. But once again, I am not a doctor. Don't take any of this as an advice. This is really just our attempt to understand things a little bit better.
Educational, the whole con thing.
I'm sorry. I'll try to find something less educational.
And maybe we can get something on arthritis, which would be very cool.
Yes.
But anyway, so this whole con thing is very interesting, and you're going to talk a little bit about it.
I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and I'm going to get to use one of the new toys the studio has. I got my smartphone plugged into the into the system. So I should be able to bring up, if we can go to input 8. There we go. So this is my smartphone. And so this is the Khan Academy. This is the Khan Academy webpage, and it's at khanacademy.org. You create an account, and the first time you log in, it has you do addition and subtraction, just basic addition and subtraction tests, and then it presents you with an entire array of courses that you can learn, everything from basic math skills all the way up to, in this case, art history and Renaissance, negative numbers and absolute numbers. There's a whole library of math tutorials, science and economics, humanities, test prep, and I think it was, for instance, if we go check under American Civics, one of the ones I was watching last night, you can see all these categories here: Social Security intro, FICA tax, Medicare sustainability, Electoral College is the one that I was watching last night, explaining in great detail how the Electoral College system works and how the representatives work, and the fact that, which I didn't realize, if you do actually get, and these videos, so what, anyway, outside of the content, these videos all run off of YouTube. So you can just go to YouTube and search for Khan Academy and watch the videos. This is a donor-supported educational site. It's free to use. And one of the interesting things you see up here in the top left corner is you can learn and you can coach. So if you have nieces and nephews or friends or big brother, big sister, or your True Colors mentor or any kind of mentor, you can actually sign up to be a coach and coach people through some of these things. And
Very cool.
so I'm not sure if, well, I'm not going to try and find it at the last minute right now, but there's a whole very interesting web that comes up about what courses lead to what courses, and we saw that in the other video that we watched. New and noteworthy.
We're pretty much out of time.
And we're pretty much out of time, so we'll kill this and come back to the studio. But Khan Academy is where I got those videos from, and
It's very cool.
it's very cool. And I think the Gates Foundation is one of the biggest supporters of it financially.
Yeah.
But it's donor supported, and they have a really cool structure for actually doing the classes, and it's a great supplement to other kinds of school education.
Yeah.
And so, like bringing the TED Talks, I highly recommend anyone that has kids or nieces or nephews or is mentoring, take a look at the Khan Academy.
Yeah, definitely check it out. On that, we absolutely have to go.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.